David Okafor was 39 years old, and until that Tuesday night, he believed his worst problem was a marriage that had gone quietly cold. He was a civil structural engineer, methodical, loyal, the kind of man who still left post-it notes on his wife's lunch after 6 years of marriage. Tanya was a corporate event planner, beautiful, socially polished, and apparently extraordinarily patient. Because what David had no way of knowing was that for 26 months, while he worked toward partner and kept choosing to believe in her, Tanya had been building a legal case designed to take everything he had ever built. She had a law firm. She had a secret bank account. She had an apartment already secured in her maiden name. And she had recruited someone David considered a brother to testify against him. Then, the night before she pulled the trigger on all of it, David's phone rang. His mother. She never called on Tuesdays. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Move your money tonight. Don't ask why." David didn't fully understand what was coming, but he trusted that voice more than he had ever trusted anyone. So he moved the money. And the next morning, a process server walked into his firm and asked for him by name. Tanya had planned for every version of David, except the one his mother just created. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The alarm never had a chance. David Okafor was already awake at 5:47 a.m., standing at the kitchen counter in a pressed charcoal shirt, his tie draped over the back of a chair, his briefcase packed and latched by the front door. The coffee was brewing, his lunch was made. He was writing a post-it note in his small, even handwriting, chicken and rice in the blue container. "Don't forget your 3 o'clock," and sticking it to the handle of Tanya's lunch bag before placing it on the second shelf of the refrigerator, right where she'd see it. He had been doing this for 11 years. She had stopped saying thank you for it sometime around year 9. He noticed. He didn't say anything. That was David Okafor in 4 words. He noticed, said nothing. Not because he was weak. Not because he didn't care. But because David processed the world the way he processed structural blueprints, methodically, completely, and without rushing to conclusions he couldn't yet support with evidence. He was a civil structural engineer at Hartfield & Crane, one of the most respected firms in the city. In 3 months, if the vote went the way everyone expected it to go, his name would be added to the letterhead. 12 years of careful, excellent work. No shortcuts, no politics, just the kind of consistent competence that eventually became impossible to overlook. He poured his coffee into a steel travel mug and stood at the kitchen window for a moment, looking out at the city below. Lights still blurred in the early dark, the street quiet, the sky a flat, pale gray. The apartment was expensive. Everything in it was well chosen. The furniture was solid. The rugs were real. The art on the walls had been selected carefully over years. It was also, in some way, David had never quite found the right word for cold. Not in temperature. In feeling. The kind of cold that settles into a space when 2 people have slowly, quietly, stopped filling it with anything warm. He took a sip of coffee. Tanya was still asleep. She wouldn't be up for another hour and a half. She had a networking dinner last night, her 3rd this month, and had come in after midnight, while David lay still in the dark, listening to the careful sounds of a woman who was trying not to wake someone. He had stayed very still. He was good at that. They had been together 12 years, married for 6, no children. A grief that lived in a quiet room inside David that he did not open often. Tanya had redirected that particular loss into her career, into her social calendar, into a version of their life that looked full from the outside. David was good at noticing the difference between what looked full and what actually was. He had noticed, for example, 14 months ago, when Tanya started password protecting her laptop. She had always been private with her phone. But the laptop was where they used to book vacations together, pull up recipes, file taxes side by side at the dining table. One evening it had simply been closed, a small lock icon in the corner of the screen, and she had moved it to her home office without a word. He'd noted it the way a structural engineer notes a hairline fracture in a load-bearing wall. Observed, filed, not yet acted upon. He had noticed when she stopped wearing her wedding band to networking events. The first time, she said she'd forgotten it on the bathroom counter. The second time, she said the clasp was bothering her. By the fourth time, she stopped explaining. By the seventh, she stopped noticing that he noticed. He had noticed the way she laughed on late-night phone calls when she thought he was asleep. Not the laugh she used with clients, which was bright and practiced. Not the laugh she used with her sister Vivienne, which was loose and a little loud. This laugh was quieter, lower, the kind of laugh that happened close to someone. David had said nothing about any of it. He did not say nothing because he was afraid. He said nothing because he had learned, over the course of a very deliberate life, that a man who speaks before he is ready gives away his position. His mother had taught him that. Not in words, in the way she had survived his father's business partner draining their savings when David was 9 years old. Not by falling apart, not by making noise, but by going very still and very focused until she had built something new from the ground up. Rochelle Okafor did not rage. She rebuilt. She called every Sunday his mother. 7 p.m. without fail. He could set his watch to it. But lately, when her calls turned to small talk about his week, about the apartment, about social plans, and Tanya's name came up naturally in the conversation, Rochelle would go quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of a woman choosing her words, a different kind of quiet. The quiet of a woman who already had words and was choosing, carefully, not to say them yet. David had noticed that too. He finished his coffee, rinsed the mug, picked up his briefcase. It was a Tuesday, like any other Tuesday, until 9 p.m., when his phone rang. His mother, calling on a Tuesday. Rochelle Okafor never called on Tuesdays. He answered on the second ring. "Ma." "David." Her voice was low, careful. Not the voice she used when she was worried. Rochelle's worried voice had a particular breathlessness to it, a slight rise at the end of each sentence. This was the other voice, the one she'd used the morning she sat him down at the kitchen table and explained calmly and completely what his father's business partner had done to their family. The voice of a woman who had already processed the worst of something and was now simply delivering the facts. "I need you to listen to me," she said. "Don't ask me questions right now. Just listen." He sat down on the edge of the couch. "I'm listening. Move your money tonight." A pause, brief and deliberate. "The joint accounts, your savings, everything you can touch. Move it tonight, and don't tell Tanya." The apartment was very quiet around him. "Ma," I said, "don't ask me yet." Not sharp, just firm. "I will explain everything, but not tonight. Tonight you move the money. You document every transfer, and you don't say a word to her." She hung up before he could find the next sentence. David held the phone in his hand for a moment. The screen went dark. He set it on the cushion beside him and looked at the coffee table, at the coaster with the ring stain Tanya had always meant to have buffed out, at the remote control placed at a precise angle that was his doing, not hers. He sat there for 47 minutes. He wasn't panicking. That was not how David Okafor was built. But he was doing what he always did when a new piece of information disrupted an existing structure. He was running the load calculations. He was checking every beam. On one side of the scale, 12 years, 6 years of marriage. A woman asleep 20 feet away in the bedroom they shared. The life they had built together. Or the life he had believed they were building together. His own deep, abiding discomfort with acting against his wife based on a phone call with no explanation. On the other side of the scale, his mother, who had never, not once in 39 years, given him bad information, who was precise and measured in all things, and would not have called on a Tuesday night, and told him to move his money without a reason that warranted it. And below that, running like a current underneath everything else, the laptop with the lock icon, the wedding band left at home, the low laugh on late-night calls, 14 months of hairline fractures he had noted and filed and not yet acted on. He looked at the closed bedroom door. Then he got up, went to his desk in the corner of the living room, and opened his laptop. The first transfer took 11 minutes to set up. A new single-name account at Meridian Bank, a branch across town where he and Tanya had no shared history. He moved deliberately through every screen. No rushed clicks, no hesitation once the decision was made. He transferred the joint savings account first, then his personal investment account, then the home equity line he had quietly stopped drawing from 8 months ago without ever explaining why, not even to himself, until right now. Right now it was obvious why. He had sensed something without naming it. That was all. And some part of him had been preparing without admitting it. $214,000. 3 transfers, each one documented. He screenshot every confirmation page, every transaction number, every timestamp. He created a new folder on his desktop, labeled it with the date, and placed every image inside it. Then he copied the folder to a cloud drive and a separate external drive he kept in the bottom drawer of his desk. He did it the way he did all things, completely, without leaving anything unfinished. When it was done, he sat for a moment in the glow of the laptop screen. The apartment was still. The city outside had gone even quieter in that specific way it did in the hours just past midnight. A held breath kind of quiet. He closed the laptop. He turned off the desk lamp. He walked down the hall and stood in the doorway of the bedroom. Tanya was asleep on her side, her back toward his side of the bed, her breathing slow and even. The room smelled like her perfume and the faint cedar of the closet. Familiar, completely familiar. David stood there for a moment, looking at the shape of her in the dark. He had expected to feel something large. Rage, maybe. Or the heavy, collapsing grief of a man losing something he loved. But what settled into his chest instead was neither of those things. It was quiet and cold and clarifying, like the temperature of a room after all the heat has been taken out of it. He crossed to his side of the bed, pulled back the covers, lay down in the dark without making a sound. Tanya slept on. David lay on his back, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. He did not sleep, but he was not restless. He was not even afraid. He was simply, completely awake. David got to work at 7:02 a.m. He stopped in the small kitchen off the main hallway, poured himself a coffee, and exchanged 2 or 3 words with a colleague who was already there. Something about a site inspection, a rescheduled meeting, normal Tuesday morning conversation. David nodded in the right places, kept his voice easy, and walked to his desk without rushing. He had a structural report due by Thursday. A drainage analysis for a commercial development in the Western District that had been giving him problems for 2 weeks. He pulled it up, set his coffee on the coaster he kept in the top right corner of his desk, and read through where he'd left off. He was not thinking about the money. He was not thinking about Rochelle's call. He was working because working was what the morning required. And David Okafor did not leave things unfinished. At 8:14, he caught a small error in the load distribution table. He fixed it, documented the correction, moved on. At 8:51, his desk phone rang. The front receptionist, Celia, who had worked at the firm for 11 years and had the particular calm of someone who had seen everything twice. "David, there's someone in the lobby asking for you. He says he's a process server." David set down his pen. "I'll be right there," he said. He walked to the lobby with his hands loose at his sides. The man waiting for him was middle-aged, in a gray jacket, holding a manila envelope. He confirmed David's name, had him sign a form, and handed the envelope over with the practiced neutrality of someone who delivered bad news for a living and had long ago stopped attaching himself to it. David thanked him. He carried the envelope back to his desk, sat down, and opened it. The document inside was 41 pages, crisp, heavy paper, the kind of printing that costs money. At the top, in clean black type, the name of the firm, Harwick and Solis, LLP, a name David recognized without wanting to. They were one of the most aggressive matrimonial firms in the city. He knew this the way you know things you never expected to need. He began to read. He read the way he reviewed engineering reports, front to back, methodically, without skimming, without letting his reaction outpace his comprehension. He kept his face neutral. His office was open plan, and 3 of his colleagues were within sightline. None of them looked over. None of them had any reason to. The petition cited a separation date of 26 months ago. He read that line twice. 26 months ago, he and Tanya had taken a trip to Savannah for their anniversary. He had booked the hotel. He had planned the dinner reservation. He remembered the restaurant, small place near the waterfront, white tablecloths, a jazz quartet in the corner. He remembered thinking she seemed distracted but deciding not to press it. A good husband giving his wife space. 26 months ago, according to this document, their marriage was already legally over, and because of that claimed date, Tanya's attorney would argue that she was entitled to a portion of everything David had earned in the 2+ years since, including his projected partnership bonus, listed here in the petition with a specificity that stopped his breath for exactly 1 second before he controlled it. They had listed the bonus, the projected range, the likely structure. David looked at that section for a long moment. That number was not public. It was not in any joint document. It was not something Tanya would have overheard. Someone had provided it deliberately, which meant someone had access they should not have had, or someone had told them. He turned the pages. The petition cataloged joint accounts, specific assets, the rental property, a vehicle. It was thorough and informed and constructed by people who had been handed a roadmap from the inside. Then he reached the section on co-petitioner's affidavit. It was a supporting declaration, cited for marital fault. The text referenced emotional unavailability and financial control. It referenced specific incidents, a birthday gathering David had left early due to a project deadline, an argument about expenses that David barely remembered, moments reframed and arranged into a portrait of a man who was cold and withholding. At the bottom of the reference, the witness was listed by initials, per procedural standard. B.C. David read the initials once, read them again. He sat very still. Brendan Cross had been in David's home more times than he could count, had sat at his table, had watched the Giants with him on that couch, had held a speech at their wedding, a real speech, warm and funny, with a story about the time David had driven 4 hours to help him move after a bad breakup, had looked David in the eye every week for 15 years. B.C. David read the document a second time, cover to page 41. He did not skip a line. When he finished, he folded it along its original crease and placed it in his briefcase. He picked up his phone and sent a text to his mother. "You knew. Thank you. I need Phyllis Drummond's number." 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then a contact card. She had already looked her up. David set the phone face down on his desk. He opened the bottom drawer and removed a fresh yellow legal pad. He set it in front of him, uncapped his pen, and wrote 2 words at the top of the first page. Everything. Documented. David pulled up to his mother's house at 6:43 p.m. The porch light was already on. It was always on when she knew he was coming, and sometimes even when she didn't. A habit from the years she'd spent raising him alone, keeping the light burning on the off chance he'd need to find his way home in the dark. He sat in the car for a moment before going in. The street was quiet. A neighbor's sprinkler clicked through its rotation. Somewhere down the block, kids were still outside, their voices carrying in the cooling evening air. Ordinary sounds from an ordinary Tuesday. The kind of sounds that had no idea what kind of day it had been. He got out of the car and went inside. Rochelle was at the kitchen table. 2 cups of coffee, already poured. A small plate of the shortbread cookies she kept in the tin by the stove. The ones she only put out when she knew a conversation was going to take something out of a person. She looked up when he walked in. Her eyes moved over him the way a doctor's do. Checking, assessing, reading what wasn't being said. She had always been able to do that. Read him without a word. "Sit down," she said. He sat. He wrapped his hands around the coffee mug. It was warm, and he hadn't realized until that moment how cold his hands were. Rochelle folded her hands on the table and looked at him directly. 3 weeks ago, she said, I got a phone call. She told him everything. Vivian Hargrove had called her on a Thursday morning. Tanya's younger sister, whom Rochelle had met only a handful of times over the years at family gatherings. Vivian had sounded like someone who hadn't slept. Like someone who had been carrying something heavy for too long and had finally lost the grip. She told Rochelle that Tanya had been meeting with a divorce attorney for over 2 years, not just consulting, building a case, building a timeline, constructing a picture of the marriage that would hold up in court and hold David accountable for years of earnings he'd accumulated while Tanya had already, in her own mind, walked out the door. She told Rochelle that Brendan had been approached by Tanya directly, that he hadn't been recruited by the attorneys, he'd been recruited by her, that Tanya had gone to him, told him what she needed, and Brendan had agreed. His cooperation hadn't been free. Tanya had promised him a stake in the rental property, David's rental property, the one he'd researched and purchased and managed for 3 years, as his payment for testimony. And then Vivian had told her one more thing. Tanya had already found a new apartment, had already signed the lease, had already paid the security deposit from a personal account she'd opened 18 months ago in her maiden name, Hargrove, so the transactions wouldn't surface in any joint statement David might review. She had a key to a new life already sitting in her purse. Rochelle had listened to all of it, without interrupting. When the call ended, she didn't reach for David's number. She sat with what she knew and spent the next 3 days quietly checking what she could. Running Tanya's maiden name through a property search, calling a contact at a title company she'd known for 20 years, verifying the account activity pattern that Vivian had described. On Tuesday night, when she was certain, she called her son. David had not moved while she spoke. His coffee had gone mostly untouched. He was looking at a fixed point on the table, taking it in the way he took everything in, fully, without flinching, filing each piece where it belonged. When Rochelle finished, the kitchen was very quiet. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her hand was small and dry and steady, the hand of a woman who had held things together through worse than. "You remember what happened to your father," she said. Not a question, a reference they both understood. His father's business partner, a man who had eaten at their table, who had been called a friend, had drained the business account over the course of 2 years. Careful, patient, convinced, all along, that no one was watching. "I know what it costs," Rochelle said, "to stay still when everything in you wants to move. But you cannot let her see you coming, David. Not for a single second." He looked at his mother, at the steadiness in her face, at the particular kind of love that doesn't soften the truth, because it respects you too much. "She won't," he said. He stayed another 20 minutes. He finished the coffee. He ate one of the shortbread cookies and complimented them the same way he always did. And Rochelle accepted the compliment the same way she always did. And for a few minutes they talked about nothing consequential. A small, ordinary mercy before he had to go back out into it. He hugged her at the door. She held on for 1 extra second. He got home at 8:11 p.m. Tanya was on the couch, legs folded beneath her, the television on. Some home renovation show, the kind she liked where everything broken gets rebuilt into something better by the end. She glanced up when he came in. "Hey," she said. Easy, unbothered. "Hey," David said. He set his bag down. He sat beside her on the couch. He looked at the television. On screen, someone was pulling up old flooring, revealing damage underneath that had been hidden for years. Tanya reached for her wine glass. She did not look at him again. She suspected nothing. David called attorney Phyllis Drummond at 7:52 a.m. He had not slept much. He hadn't expected to. He'd lain in the dark beside Tanya and listened to her breathe and thought about timelines, 26 months, 18 months, 14 months, all these careful, quiet intervals of time during which a plan had been built around him while he went to work and paid the mortgage and left post-it notes on lunches no one appreciated. The phone rang twice before a receptionist answered. David gave his name. He said it was urgent. He said Attorney Drummond had been referred by Rochelle Okafor. The receptionist put him on hold for less than a minute. "Mr. Okafor." The voice that came on was even and unhurried. Not warm exactly, but steady in a way that felt better than warm. "I have a 2:30 opening this afternoon. Can you make that?" "Yes," David said. "Bring everything you have." Phyllis Drummond's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown. Clean lines, good light, the kind of space that communicated competence without trying to impress anyone. There were no motivational phrases on the walls, no decorative scales of justice, just bookshelves, organized files, and a desk that looked like actual work happened on it every day. Phyllis herself looked exactly like her voice. A black woman in her early 50s, natural hair pulled back, reading glasses on the edge of her nose, a dark blazer that fit like it had been made for her specifically. She stood when David came in and shook his hand with a firm, brief grip, then gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit," she said. "Show me what you have." David opened his briefcase and placed the documents on her desk in the order he'd organized them that morning. The divorce petition first. All 41 pages, paper-clipped by section. Behind it, the printed transfer confirmations with timestamps. Behind that, the screenshots he'd taken of each step in the transfer process, the account numbers, the balances before and after. Phyllis picked up the petition. She read. She did not react. She turned pages with the steady efficiency of someone who had read 100 documents like this one and understood not just what each word meant, but what each word was trying to do. It took her 11 minutes. She set it down and picked up the transfer records. These she reviewed more quickly, running a finger down the page, cross-referencing dates, checking timestamps against the service of process notation on the front of the petition. Then she set everything down and looked at David. "The transfers are clean," she said. "You moved before service of process and before any legal hold was in place. The documentation is thorough. Frankly, more thorough than most clients manage even with guidance." She paused. "Was that natural for you, or did you know to do it?" "Both," David said. She nodded once, like that told her something useful. "The separation date they're claiming, 26 months? That's an aggressive position. It's not impossible to argue, but it requires evidence. Evidence of a genuine, established separation that your wife maintained consistently during that period. Separate finances, separate living arrangements, a documented record of parallel lives." She folded her hands. "She was living in your home, using your accounts, attending functions with you. That's not separation. That's performance. We'll challenge it, and I expect we'll win that challenge." "And the affidavit," David said. Phyllis's expression did not change. "The affidavit from BC is only dangerous if the claims inside it can be substantiated. Testimony that can't be backed up by evidence isn't testimony. It's noise, and it will face full deposition." She let that land for a moment. We will depose him. He will be asked to support every assertion under oath. If he can't, and I suspect there are reasons he won't be able to, the affidavit collapses. She picked up her pen. I have one question for you, Mr. Okafor, and I need you to think before you answer it. She looked at him directly. Is there anything she can use against you? David thought about it. He thought about it the way he thought about every serious question. Genuinely, without rushing to an answer he wanted to be true. He thought about the years, the lunches with the post-it notes, the rental property he had researched alone, purchased alone, managed alone, the vacations he had planned, the dinners for her family he had paid for without being asked and without keeping score. Until now, when keeping score turned out to matter enormously. He thought about who he had been in this marriage, the kind of husband he had been. No, he said. I've been a good husband. He paused. That was the problem. Phyllis held his gaze for a moment. Then she uncapped her pen. Good, she said. Then we build. She gave him his homework directly. No preamble, no softening. A complete financial chronology of the marriage. Every shared contribution, documented. Every home improvement, with cost. Every vacation. Every gift to Tanya's family. The birthday dinners. The graduation presents. The money sent to her mother twice when things were tight for that side of the family. All of it. Receipts where he had them. Bank statements where he didn't. His own memory organized into a timeline and cross-referenced against what the records could confirm. People underestimate how much they've given, Phyllis said. Don't underestimate it. Write it all down. He was at his desk by 7 that evening. He had his laptop open, a legal pad beside it. A cup of coffee he kept reheating in the microwave because he kept forgetting it was there. He pulled up 6 years of bank statements. He pulled up email threads from contractors, from the vacation rental site, from the home improvement store where he'd bought the materials to redo the guest bathroom himself over a long weekend 2 years ago. He wrote everything down. He wrote down the $4,200 he'd wired to Tanya's mother during the rough patch in 2021, the one Tanya had called him crying about at work, and he'd transferred the money before she'd even finished explaining. He wrote down the anniversary trip to Portugal, flights, hotel, the cooking class she'd wanted to take, the jewelry she'd seen in a shop window, and he'd gone back for a loan the next morning. He wrote down the roof repair, the new water heater, the refinished hardwood floors that now looked like the floor in a magazine. He wrote it all down. Just past midnight, he organized the documents into a single folder on his desktop. He looked at it for a moment. Then he typed the label and hit Enter. The record. The call came 2 days later, just after noon. David was at his desk reviewing load calculations for a bridge support retrofit when his phone buzzed. Rochelle. He picked up on the second ring. Vivian will meet with you, she said. No preamble. This afternoon, if you can make it. Here, at the house. I'll be there at 4, David said. He went back to his calculations. He finished them. He submitted the file. Then he drove to his mother's house. Rochelle opened the door before he reached the porch. Inside, the house smelled the way it always did. Coffee and the faint sweetness of the candles Rochelle kept on the bookshelf in the hallway. The kitchen table had 3 chairs pulled out and a plate of sliced fruit in the center that nobody was going to eat. Vivienne was already seated when David walked in. She was younger than he'd pictured. 34, he knew, but she looked younger than that right now. She had Tanya's same sharp cheekbones, the same dark eyes, but none of Tanya's polish. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, shoulders slightly inward, the posture of a person who had already rehearsed an apology and wasn't sure it was enough. David sat across from her. Rochelle took the chair at the head of the table and did not speak. "Thank you for coming," David said. His voice was calm, even. He meant it. Vivian looked up at him, then back down. "I should have called sooner," she said. "I knew things I shouldn't have stayed quiet about. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I kept telling myself it wasn't my business. It's all right, David said. It's not. She shook her head. But I'm here now. She told him what she knew in the order she knew it, which was not always the order things had happened. David listened without interrupting. He did what he always did. He organized the information as it arrived, built the structure of it in his mind, held the pieces steady until the shape became clear. Brendan had not been approached by Tanya's attorneys. He had been approached by Tanya, directly, personally. More than a year before the petition was filed, David kept his face still. The arrangement, as Vivian understood it, was specific. Brendan would provide a supporting affidavit attesting to David's emotional unavailability and what Tanya's attorneys planned to frame as financial control. In exchange, once Tanya secured the rental property in the settlement, Brendan would receive a stake in it, not a small one. The property David had identified, researched, purchased, and managed without a single dollar of Tanya's money would be split and handed to the man who had sat at David's table, eaten David's food, and called himself his brother. Vivian finished that part and went quiet. David waited. He could see that she had more to say. He could see it the way you see weather coming, the slight change in her posture, the way she looked at the table instead of at him. He did not rush her. She exhaled slowly. There's something else, she said, and I need you to know that telling you this is… She stopped again. Her jaw tightened. It's the hardest part. Go ahead, David said. She looked at him. Brendan and Tanya, it's not just about the affidavit. It's not just strategy. Her voice dropped slightly. They haven't been just friends for a long time, David. The room went completely quiet. David did not move. He did not ask her to explain. He did not ask how long, or how she knew, or any of the questions that were suddenly lined up behind his teeth. He already understood. The information landed, and he understood it completely, and he let it settle into the same place where he had been quietly storing everything else. The password-protected laptop, the missing wedding band, the way she laughed differently on the phone in the dark. It all fit now. Every piece fit. Thank you, Vivian, he said. His voice did not shake. I mean that. She nodded quickly, and he could see she was holding herself together with some effort. He did not make her sit in the silence any longer than necessary. He pushed back from the table and stood, and Rochelle walked him to the door without either of them saying much. At the threshold, she put her hand briefly on his arm. Just that. Just a hand. He nodded and walked to his car. He sat in the parking garage of his building for 22 minutes. He did not cry. He did not hit the steering wheel. He sat with both hands in his lap and stared at the concrete wall in front of him and let the full weight of it move through him. All of it. The depth of it. The specific cruelty of it. And he felt it, the way you feel something you already half knew but couldn't let yourself fully know until someone said the words out loud. Then he got out of the car, rode the elevator up, unlocked the front door. Tanya was on the couch with her laptop, talking through a Bluetooth earpiece to someone about a corporate event she was coordinating. Table arrangements, a signature cocktail, a client who couldn't decide between two venue options. David went to the kitchen and made dinner. He cooked pasta. He boiled water, salted it, sliced garlic, let it go golden in olive oil. He listened to Tanya talk through the details of a life that had nothing to do with him. She did not look up when he set her plate on the coffee table beside her. She mouthed thank you without pausing her call. He sat at the kitchen table and ate alone. After dinner, he stood at the sink and washed the dishes by hand. Both plates, both sets of silverware, the pan, while the television came on in the next room, and Tanya settled into the couch cushions. The hot water ran over his hands. He watched the soap go down the drain. He thought about the rental property. He thought about 15 years. He thought about Vivienne's face when she said a long time. He set the last dish in the rack. Every action from this point forward would be precise. The forensic accountant's name was Gerald Osee. He was a small, precise man in his late 50s, with reading glasses he wore pushed up on his forehead until he actually needed them, at which point he lowered them with the deliberate movement of someone who had done the same thing 10,000 times. Phyllis had worked with him for over a decade. She introduced him to David in 3 sentences and then left them alone in the conference room. Gerald did not make small talk. David respected that immediately. "Give me access to everything," Gerald said. "Joint accounts, household accounts, any shared credit lines. 6 years back. I'll need statements, not just summaries." "Already organized," David said. He slid a USB drive across the table, labeled by year and account type. "There's a spreadsheet index on the drive." Gerald picked up the drive and looked at David over the tops of his glasses. "Most people bring me a shoebox." "I'm not most people," David said. Gerald almost smiled. He plugged in the drive and went to work. 3 days later, Gerald called David at 7:15 in the morning. "Found something," he said. "Can you come in today?" David rearranged his morning and was at Gerald's office by 9. Gerald had printed a single document, a transaction timeline, clean and color-coded, and placed it on the desk between them. He tapped a column on the left side. "There's a savings account," Gerald said, "opened 18 months ago at a credit union across town. The account holder's name is Tanya Hargrove." He paused to let that land. "Not Okafor. Hargrove, her maiden name." David looked at the document. He did not look up. "These figures here," Gerald moved his finger to the right, "are transfers from your joint household account into that account. They came in at different amounts, different intervals, small enough to look like nothing, irregular enough not to trigger any flags." David traced the column with his eyes. $40, $60, $90 at a time. Occasionally $150. Sometimes nothing for 6 weeks. Then 3 transfers in a month. 18 months, Gerald said. Total redirected. $34,000. David set the paper down. $34,000 from an account he was contributing to every month. From the account he deposited his salary into. Grocery money, utility money, the money he had handed over because that was what he understood partnership to mean. He had been funding her exit. "Marital waste?" David asked. "Documented marital waste," Gerald said. "There's a difference. This isn't a theory. This is a paper trail." David folded his hands on the desk. "Send everything to Phyllis," he said. He found the laptop that same weekend. It was in the back of the hall closet, behind a box of tax records and a sleeping bag they had used exactly once, on a camping trip in the 3rd year of their marriage, when things were still uncomplicated. A silver laptop they'd shared for a while, retired when David upgraded, and Tanya got her own. He'd meant to wipe it. He never had. He plugged it in. The battery still held a charge. Barely. He opened the cloud backup application and logged in with the shared account credentials. Credentials neither of them had ever changed, because neither of them had thought it mattered. Files from 2 years before the petition was filed loaded in a quiet, organized list. He sat at the kitchen table and read for an hour and 40 minutes. The messages between Tanya and Brendan were not explicit. They were careful. Careful in the way people are careful when they know they're doing something they cannot undo. But not careful enough, because careful enough would have meant deleting them. And deleting them would have required believing David might one day look. Tanya had never believed that. She had looked at his patience and seen passivity. She had looked at his silence and assumed ignorance. She had been wrong about him for a long time. The messages built a clear picture, not salacious, but damning. Planning. Coordination. The language of 2 people who shared a secret that belonged to someone else. He closed the laptop, sat still for a moment. Then he opened his phone and sent Gerald and Phyllis each a single message. "I have additional materials. Available whenever you're ready." He met with Phyllis 2 days later. He placed the printed correspondence on her desk alongside Gerald's accounting report. She read through both without speaking, her face composed and unreadable. When she finished, she set the pages down and straightened them into a neat stack. "She came to take your house," Phyllis said. "She's going to leave with nothing she didn't arrive with." David looked at her evenly. "Make sure she knows it was me who built it." Phyllis held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and turned to her computer. "I'll schedule the discovery meeting," she said. "Give me a week." That evening, David sat at his desk and drafted a brief confirmation email to Phyllis. Final documents attached, everything labeled, nothing missing. He read it once, sent it, and closed the laptop. He was asleep by 10 o'clock. It was the first night in weeks that he didn't lie awake listening to the sound of his own thoughts. The offices of Hartwell and Crane occupied the 14th floor of a glass building downtown, the kind of address that was chosen specifically to make opposing parties feel small before they ever sat down. The lobby had marble floors. The receptionist smiled at them the way people smile when they believe they already know how something ends. David noticed all of it. He said nothing. Phyllis walked beside him in a charcoal suit, her leather portfolio tucked under one arm, her heels quiet and even on the marble. She had not offered him a pep talk in the elevator. She had not offered him one at all. Ever. Which was one of the reasons he trusted her completely. The conference room was long and bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. A silver pitcher of water sat at the center of the table, 4 chairs on each side and one at the head. Tanya was already there. She sat at the far end of the table in a cream blazer, her posture perfect, her expression composed. She looked polished and prepared, the way she always looked in rooms where she needed to perform. She did not look at David when he entered. Then she did, briefly, and something moved across her face that she smoothed away too quickly. Her attorney was a man named Ellison, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, the kind of man who treated every room like a stage he had already claimed. He shook Phyllis's hand with the comfortable authority of someone who expected to be in charge of everything that followed. "Ms. Drummond," he said. "Good to finally put a face to the name." "Mr. Ellison," Phyllis said, warmly, neutrally, nothing more. They sat. A paralegal arranged folders. Someone filled the water glasses. Ellison opened. He did it well. David would give him that. He laid out the separation date, 26 months, and built his argument with smooth, practiced confidence, framing it as settled fact rather than the legal claim it actually was. He referenced David's projected partnership earnings with precision, citing figures that could only have come from documents Tanya had accessed directly. He flagged the rental property, described it as a jointly leveraged marital asset, and he did it with the kind of tone that suggested disagreement would be not just futile, but embarrassing. Then he referenced the affidavit. "We have supporting testimony," Ellison said, "from a long-standing mutual acquaintance, speaking to a pattern of emotional unavailability and financial gatekeeping within the marriage. The affidavit is substantive. It will hold." He said it the way men say things when they expect no one to push back. He set his pen down and looked across the table with the patient expression of a man waiting to be offered a settlement. Phyllis opened her portfolio. She did not rush. She did not perform. She simply began placing documents on the table, one at a time, with the quiet precision of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment and had never once been in a hurry to reach it. The forensic accounting report came first. Gerald's color-coded transaction timeline. 18 months. $34,000. Tanya Hargrove, account holder. She slid a copy to Ellison without comment and placed the second copy in the center of the table. "Documented marital waste," Phyllis said simply. "Not a theory, a paper trail." Next, the financial chronology David had built. 6 years of contributions, line by line. Every mortgage payment, every home improvement, every vacation, every gift sent to Tanya's family. The document established, plainly and without argument, who had funded the life being divided. "We will be contesting the separation date," Phyllis said. "We have supporting evidence that the claimed date is unsupportable. That motion is included in this packet." Then she placed the subpoena notice on the table. "The individual referenced in the co-petitioner's affidavit will be called for full deposition," she said. "His communications with your client, going back 24 months, have been subpoenaed. We expect full production." Ellison's pen stopped moving. He looked at the notice. His expression did not change, but something behind it did. Then Phyllis reached into her portfolio one final time. She removed a single document, fewer pages than the others, clean and precise, and placed it at the center of the table. "This is a sworn and notarized declaration," she said, "from Vivian Hargrove. She corroborates the timeline of the coordinated exit strategy and makes specific reference to the intended transfer of the rental property to a third party prior to settlement." The room went quiet, not the comfortable quiet of a negotiation pausing to breathe. Something else. David did not look at Tanya. He didn't need to. He saw it in his peripheral vision, the way the color left her face, the way her hand stopped moving on the table in front of her, the way she looked at her own attorney with something she could not fully conceal. Ellison set his pen down. "I'd like to request a brief recess," he said. "Of course," Phyllis said. They stepped out. The door clicked shut behind them, and David, alone with Phyllis in the long, bright room, unfolded his hands, let out a single breath. Slow, controlled, almost imperceptible. They rode the elevator down in silence. The marble lobby opened around them. The receptionist smiled again, the same smile, and this time David almost felt sorry for her. She didn't know yet that the story had already ended differently than she'd assumed. The glass doors opened, and they stepped out into the afternoon. "They'll call within 48 hours, Phyllis said. David looked out at the street, at the city moving around them, indifferent and alive. "Let them," he said. The bar was called Crossroads. Brendan had named it himself, back when the idea had been a dream, and David had co-signed the business loan without hesitation, because that was what you did for family. David had been there for the soft opening, had brought a bottle of expensive bourbon and stood at the bar, watching Brendan work the room. Loud, magnetic, pulling strangers into his orbit like it was the easiest thing in the world. David had been proud of him that night. He remembered that clearly. He parked outside at 12:40 on a Wednesday. The midday shift was slow. 2 guys at the bar watching a pregame show, a waitress restocking napkin holders, the faint smell of fryer oil and cleaning solution hanging in the air. A different place in the daylight. Smaller, somehow. Less charming without the noise and the crowd to hold it together. The bartender recognized David and nodded toward the back. Brendan was at his desk when David walked in. A cluttered, windowless room with a scheduling board on one wall and case invoices stacked on the other. He was on the phone. When he saw David in the doorway, his face did something complicated in under a second. He wrapped up the call in 4 words and set the phone down. "Hey," Brendan said. He tried to make it sound easy. David sat down across from him. He placed the deposition notice on the desk between them. He did not slide it dramatically. He did not make a speech. He simply set it down, face up, and let Brendan read the header. Brendan looked at it, then at David. "I'm not here to argue," David said. "I'm here so you understand what's coming before it arrives." Brendan leaned back. His hand moved toward the document, then stopped. "David, man, look, I need you to hear me out." David said nothing. He waited. "She came to me," Brendan said. The words came out fast, rehearsed, like he'd been practicing them in the shower for weeks. "Tanya came to me. I didn't go looking for any of this. She told me you two had already been done for years, that it was just about getting out clean, and that—" "I know," I know how it sounds. I know. He rubbed the back of his neck. It wasn't supposed to go this far. That's the truth. He looked up, and for a second, David could see something real in his face. Not remorse, exactly. More like the look of a man who had told himself a story so many times he was only now hearing how it sounded out loud. David let him finish. Let the silence sit there for a moment after. The deposition is going to ask you to support specific claims, David said. Emotional unavailability, financial control. You put your name behind those words. He paused. Can you substantiate them, Brendan? Because you've been in my home. You've sat at my table. You've watched me in a marriage for 6 years at close range. He looked at him steadily. What are you going to say when they ask you to give examples? Brendan's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. When you can't substantiate them, David continued, and you won't be able to, the liability shifts. The affidavit stops being a weapon and starts being a problem. Your problem. He let that land. This bar has a co-signed business loan. You should talk to someone about what exposure looks like before you sit in that deposition chair. Brendan opened his mouth, closed it. David picked up his copy of the notice, stood, and walked out. He did not look back. He didn't need to. The apartment walk-through began at 6 o'clock. Both attorneys were present. A neutral third-party assessor moved through the rooms with a clipboard, while Ellison stood near the window and Phyllis stood near the door, and the whole thing was conducted with the careful, managed quiet of people performing a legal function rather than a human one. Tanya stood in the living room. She was dressed well, as always, but something in the way she was holding herself had changed since the conference room. The posture was still correct. The composure was still assembled. But the certainty underneath it, the particular kind of confidence that comes from believing a plan is bulletproof, that was gone. David could see its absence, the way you can see where a picture used to hang. When the assessor moved into the bedroom, Ellison followed. Phyllis stayed near the door and gave them a nod. David looked at Tanya. I need you to know one thing, he said. His voice was quiet, steady, the voice of a man who has already done the grieving and arrived somewhere past it. I knew something was wrong for a long time. I kept choosing to believe in you anyway. He paused. That wasn't weakness. That was who I am. And it is the reason that everything you tried to take is still mine. Tanya said nothing. Her eyes were fixed on a point just past his shoulder. I don't hate you, David said. I just finally see you. He turned toward Phyllis. We're done here, he said. Phyllis was already reaching for her portfolio. David walked through the hallway, past the bookshelves he had built with his own hands on a Saturday in March 6 years ago, past the living room he had painted himself, and through the front door. He did not look back. 14 months later, the living room was a different color. David had repainted it himself, same as before. A deep, warm charcoal. The color he'd wanted for years, and Tanya had always waved off without looking up from her phone. Too dark, too heavy. It'll make the whole room feel small. The room didn't feel small. It felt like his. He was at the kitchen table now, a Sunday evening in late autumn, a structural blueprint spread open in front of him, and a mug of coffee sitting at the edge of it, long since gone cold. The kind of work he brought home not because he had to, but because he genuinely wanted to, because partner meant he chose his projects now. And the project on the table was a pedestrian bridge commission he'd lobbied for himself. Something that would be built. Something that would hold weight. He picked up the coffee anyway, took a sip, made a face. The consequences had come the way he always knew they would. Quietly, completely. In the way that real things do, without drama or announcement. Tanya received nothing from the rental property. The $34,000 in redirected marital funds was deducted from her settlement before her attorney could build a single argument around it. The separation date her team had staked everything on, 26 months, carefully constructed, meant to carve out a piece of everything David had built, was rejected. The judge had reviewed Phyllis's documentation, and the motion had not survived contact with the actual record. She had relocated. The apartment she'd secretly secured in her maiden name, the one she'd been so careful about, the one that was supposed to be a fresh start. It was a significant step down from what she'd planned on. What she'd planned on was David's rental property and a settlement built on 2 years of manufactured grievance. What she got was a one-bedroom she could afford on her own income, in a neighborhood that was not the one she'd had in mind. The professional network she'd spent 6 years building, the event industry contacts, the corporate clients, the carefully maintained friendships with people she'd met through David's firm dinners and David's colleagues and David's reputation, had thinned out the way smoke does in an open room. Slowly, and then all at once. The people who had been genuinely his drifted back, naturally, without being asked. The rest had moved on, because people who build their connections through proximity to someone else tend not to last when the proximity ends. David didn't think about her often. When he did, it was without heat. Brendan's deposition had been a quiet disaster. He had sat in that chair and been asked one by one to substantiate the specific claims in his affidavit, to give dates, to give examples, to name a single instance of financial control, of emotional unavailability that he had personally witnessed at close range over 15 years of friendship and 6 years of watching a marriage from inside it. He could not. He recanted 2 key assertions before the session was halfway through. His attorney, brought in at the last minute, visibly underprepared, had tried to walk it back as clarification. No one in the room was fooled. The audit came later. A separate matter surfaced through the deposition process, a discrepancy in the bar's accounts that had nothing to do with David and everything to do with Brendan's own record-keeping. It was still ongoing. He had not received the rental property. He had not received anything Tanya promised him. He had received the full and unambiguous weight of what he'd chosen. David had heard through mutual acquaintances that Brendan didn't come up much in their old social circle anymore. Not because anyone had announced anything, just because questions had been asked that he couldn't answer cleanly, and people had drawn their own conclusions in the silence. David had not said a word against him to anyone. He hadn't needed to. He was seeing ADZ. That was how he thought of it, quietly, without making it into something it didn't need to be yet. She was an architect. She worked in sustainable design and talked about load-bearing structures the way David talked about them, with genuine enthusiasm, the kind you couldn't fake. She laughed with her whole face. She asked him questions and then actually listened to the answers. She had come to the apartment twice. The second time, she'd stood in front of the new art on the wall, a large canvas print he'd bought the month after the divorce was finalized, warm ochre tones, clean geometric shapes, something Tanya would have dismissed without looking at it twice, and said, "This is exactly right for this room." He had thought about that for several days afterward. His phone buzzed on the table beside the blueprint. He knew before he looked. Sunday evening, right on schedule, the way it had been every Sunday for as long as he could remember. Only longer now. Lighter. He picked up on the first ring. "Hey, Ma. How's my son?" Rochelle's voice came through warm and steady. David looked up from the blueprint, looked around the apartment, the charcoal walls, the shelves he'd built, the art he'd chosen, the life he had rebuilt on a foundation no one had been able to touch because he had laid every beam of it himself. Good. He meant it completely. Really good. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear.